Alrighty, hello folks. Welcome to Talky Taffy, where we take a bite of some random topic and stretch it out. My name is Emily,
Hello, I'm Doug.
and we are your co-hosts today. So, today is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Raise your hand if you think or consider yourself to be a serial procrastinator. Okay, cool. So I have always been hyper aware of my own procrastination ever since I was a kid. So I've also found that I have some common tasks that I use to procrastinate. So do you have any specific things that you like to do when you're trying to avoid a task?
Are there things that
Oh,
I do
lucky.
when I'm trying to avoid tasks?
Yeah.
I
Do you have
mean,
like something like a go-to task that you're like, oh, I'm going to, I don't know, do my laundry. I'd rather do laundry than whatever task I have to do. For me, like, for example, my thing is procrastinating. I will go
I
in
see.
my entire house and just organize everything before I even think about doing the task at hand.
No, it's definitely video games for me, if anything, or
Mm.
just like Twitch.
Yeah, for me, it's like if I'm doing something that's kind of productive, then it makes me feel less bad about procrastinating something, you know? But that being said, I just want to say that this week I fully immersed myself in this week's topic by definitely procrastinating until Monday because that's just how dedicated I am to really getting the full experience before writing my script. It's not because I was actually procrastinating or anything, so.
Same here with our last episode where I was writing it on the plane on the way back to here so I could start, go live.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't that bad, but I've gotten close a couple of times. So,
Yeah.
believe it or not, I got the idea for this episode like a month ago. And in appropriate fashion, I put it off until this week. So, I've always struggled with being a procrastinator, and I know that a lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm quite the perfectionist. I don't like to even start a task or even think about doing a task if I can't imagine myself doing it perfectly. And
Sure.
from what I found as I was researching this week's topic is that yes, those two things tend to correlate pretty closely, but there was a lot of other things about human psychology that I found to be really interesting and why so many of us regularly procrastinate and have a hard time breaking that kind of cycle.
Mhm.
And so, procrastination, the word itself is twofold. So it comes from the Latin word procrastinare, to put off until tomorrow. But it also is derived from the Greek word akrasia, which means doing something against our better judgment. So it's procrastination not only implies putting something off, but we know that it's a bad idea to actually procrastinate. So it's
Interesting.
twofold: not doing the task at hand and putting it off to another time, but also knowing against our better judgment that putting it off is not good. So, that being said, procrastination does not equal laziness because procrastination is an active process and it's choosing to do something else in place of a given task, whereas laziness suggests inactivity.
It's more like reshuffling priorities, right?
Definitely. Yeah, it's like, oh, instead of doing this, I'm going to do something else instead of like, oh, I'm just not going to do anything. Like that seems to be the big difference, as well as like the psychological component of like feeling bad about putting off that particular task.
I don't know if you're
So-
familiar with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Have you heard of that before?
I've heard about it from so many people, and I've I've actually been meaning to read it,
But you've
but
been putting it off.
I've been putting it off. But yeah, I've heard great things about that book.
One of the habits it talks about is putting first things first, which really does speak to procrastination. And it sorts things into 4 different buckets. There's like stuff that's not important, not urgent. There's stuff that is important and urgent, like emergencies. And then the other 2 are the interesting ones. There's like urgent stuff that's not important, like getting a text from a friend or getting like a shopping alert or something that something's on sale. Those are the kind of things where it's like, oh, jump on this lightning sale now before you lose it. But it's not really important, right? And then the one that you have to like work on more is things that are not urgent but are important. And I think that is where procrastination comes from a lot of times, is just not having the motivation to do those things because they're not urgent.
Definitely.
Until they become urgent.
There's a lot of coping that comes with procrastination, and it's really interesting because the misconception that I found as I was researching procrastination is that procrastination is not mostly a time management issue, but rather it is a negative emotion management issue. So it's a lot more psychological and emotional than it is necessarily organizational by nature. So actually, we can jump right into why do we procrastinate? So it's not necessarily a character flaw. And I love this quote by Dr. Tim Pischel, who is a professor for the procrastination research group at the Carleton University. So procrastination is a emotional regulation problem, not a time management problem. And he did this great study where they brought students into a lab and told them at the end of the session that they'd be doing a math puzzle. So some were told that the test was meaningful and that it was going to determine their cognitive ability, while others were just told that it was just meaningless, fun, just try it out. And so before doing the puzzle, the students were just given X amount of time to do whatever. They could choose to do the task, they could choose to mess around beforehand. And as it happened, chronic procrastinators only delayed the puzzle if they believed that it was actually important and that it was going to test their cognitive ability. Whereas when it came to just being meaningless and fun, fewer people, if any people, did the puzzle right away.
Do you think that comes from like that mindset that, you know, hey, I work better under pressure? I'm sorry if I'm jumping.
Yeah, that's actually not. So a lot of people say, oh, like if I procrastinate it's because I perform well under pressure, and but that's not necessarily true. That's probably your serotonin and dopamine kind of flooding your brain after you finish a task on a short period of time.
In other words, if I were to do something, if I were to like get focused and in the zone and complete it in a short amount of time, days before it needed to happen, I would feel that same reaction.
You would feel that same exact way, because when you're completing a task under extreme stress, after you've completed the task, your brain is flooded with a bunch of like relief hormones, basically.
Okay.
And there was actually some other studies shown that when they measured the quality of people's work from when they procrastinated a task and when they actually did the task beforehand, there was no difference in quality either. So it's kind of just a psychological, mental thing when it comes to how well you perform under procrastination-induced pressure.
Interesting.
So there was another study that was done on 80 students, and it assessed them for procrastination. And what happened is they had the participants read about stressful situations with some anxiety caused by unnecessary delay. And for instance, like in the scenario, a person had a suspicious mole from coming back from a vacation, but they put off going to the doctor for a long time, creating a worrisome situation. And so the professors, researchers asked the participants what they thought of this particular scenario, and she found that procrastinators tended to say things like, "Oh, at least I went to the doctor before it got really worse," whereas people who didn't really regularly procrastinate said things like, "Oh, if only I had gone to the doctor sooner." And that type of response kind of embraces tension in the moment as opposed to trying to learn something for the future. So essentially, procrastinators have a tendency to want to make themselves feel better in the moment rather than drawing insight from the mistake that was made that made them feel bad. So
is it kind of a shoot, what am I trying to say? It's like an instant gratification thing.
Definitely.
Does that have?
Yeah.
Is that making sense?
Yes, and it's a lot to do with stress levels and kind of coping with those stress levels. So, for instance, we look into why procrastinators procrastinate, and we shouldn't feel that bad about it because evolution is partly to blame as far as the psychology of our brains. So we have like what's called the present bias, where we are kind of hardwired to prioritize short-term needs ahead of long-term because it's a survival instinct. Because if you experience any sort of stress, your brain, particularly the amygdala, which is the threat detector of the brain, will take any sort of stress, regardless of whether it's like life or death or, you know, the stress of doing an assignment. It views it as a genuine threat and becomes more focused on removing the threat necessarily than addressing it head on because that's more dangerous. So basically, it's pretty common for our brains to take a current stressor and then just say, oh, well, I could either choose to fight it or fight or flight, basically. But the easier way out is to flight and just to avoid the problem rather than addressing it head on.
So that
there's
fear,
also this...
that fear of confrontation can actually just force us to just delay the time that it takes us for us to confront it.
Definitely.
I have felt that before. Definitely.
Yeah, this is a pretty common loop that people fall into when it comes to procrastination. And also, the reason why procrastination can be so hard to kick is because of that momentary, very, very brief amount of relief that we feel whenever we choose to procrastinate. And that serves as like a reward for your brain for procrastinating. But that only compounds that feeling of stress and anxiety and self-blame that comes afterward. Even though that moment of relief is short, it's just enough for our brains to latch onto it and say like, oh, this is good enough to do because like I feel so relieved, when in actuality it's just us lying to ourselves. Yeah.
Wow.
There's also this thing called effective forecasting, which is basically predicting how we'll feel in the future. And it turns out that people are pretty bad at this. And the problem is that people have a hard time basically seeing themselves as another person. So it's more like when you... I'm trying to think of like the correct words.
There's like a current version of you and a future version of you.
Yes, you have a hard time equating the future version of you to the current version of you, no matter how good you are or how good you think you are at doing that. Humans are actually not very great at doing that. So that's why we think, oh, that's a problem for future Emily. That's literally saying another person, not for yourself. So, which is another reason why procrastination can be so hard to kick. So, there are several ways to combat procrastination, and there were a lot of different methods and approaches that I came across when I was doing my research, and I got a little bit frustrated, not gonna lie, because a lot of it is what I would consider to be kind of like juju magic kind of brain things, because it's like all about mentality and self-talk, and that kind of stuff always has a tendency to drive me just a little bit crazy, even though I know it's good for you. Like meditation, things that are like not as tangible or quantifiable, they tend to really escape from me, because I like to have numbers, for things to be measurable, but a lot of the solutions that have been presented as being the most effective for kicking procrastination are those kinds of mentality things. So, but that's also because procrastination is, again, an emotional issue, not necessarily a time management issue.
So that's where that changing your mentality and doing this juju really does help with it.
Yeah.
Has that ever worked for you? Have you like meditated and then gotten in the zone to do something?
I find that once I trick myself into starting the task, it's much easier to continue doing the task. I'm not a huge fan of meditation myself, but it's kind of like going to the gym, where once you get there, like going to the gym is the hardest part rather than doing the actual exercises.
That part has always been extremely hard for me. So home gym for the win.
Yeah. So some options for how to combat procrastination. This was given by psychiatrist and neuroscientist Dr. Judson Brewer from Brown University's Mindfulness Center. Basically, we have to present our brains with a reward that is better than the relief that we get from procrastination, to break that cycle of putting things off. And he has what's called the bigger, better offer, and finding a better reward than avoidance. And this reward, he argues, must come from an internal place, not an external place, which, again, I say is really, really, really difficult because it's a mentality thing.
So, for instance, like to trick your brain into thinking it's actually good to do something, it can't be based on, oh, well, this is due for work, this is due for school. It's not, hey, this needs to get done so that people will be impressed with me or whatever. It's much more, I will feel accomplished if I do this thing. And
definitely
stress will be lifted off of me once I complete this thing. Not those external sources. Interesting.
And the number one tip that I found was forgiving yourself in the moments you procrastinate. You would not believe the number of articles that I read where they gave that piece of advice, and I was like, forgiveness? Of all places for procrastination, how does the topic of self-forgiveness come up? Which I found very, very interesting. And basically, they even did a study on this where they said, in a 2010 study, researchers found that students who were able to forgive themselves from procrastinating the first time were less likely to procrastinate the second time for their next task. So they concluded that, and this is a great direct quote, that self-forgiveness supported productivity by allowing the individual to move past their maladaptive behavior and focus on the upcoming examination without the burden of past acts. So that was really, really fascinating to me, because I never thought of my procrastinating behavior as being self-punishing, but being like, oh, well, I always used to do that, so if I do it this time, then it doesn't really matter because I'm just used to doing that. I
find that really interesting, because so you're saying basically give yourself forgiveness for procrastinating when it happens?
Yeah. Don't beat yourself up.
Doesn't that seem like positive reinforcement of a bad habit? Or is it just
I think
not
it has
negative
to come from a very
reinforcement?
specific place because procrastination by nature includes a negative feeling of kind of self-resentment and being like, oh, I should have done it sooner. I should have blah, blah, blah. Because there's conscious putting something or prioritizing something else, but then there's also procrastinating, which is putting it off and feeling bad about it. So there's like a difference in purpose when it comes to procrastinating and then reprioritizing. So I think that's where that forgiveness comes from.
And I assume...
Because if you choose...
Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Oh. So basically, if you choose to say, oh, something else came up that is actually more important that I need to do now, this needs to be put off. That's different from procrastination, where procrastination is, oh, I don't want to do that thing, so I'll find something else to replace it, and I'll put that off, even though I should be doing it right now. So that negative feeling of like, oh, I shouldn't have done that is always associated with procrastination.
So I wonder, because even though that is like a negative feedback loop, when you feel guilty about procrastinating something in the sense of just not doing it as opposed to doing something else more important, I wonder if that's actually like a negative feedback loop in the sense that that negative feeling actually encourages you to do it again. That kind of sounds like what you're saying, huh?
Yeah. Basically. Yeah, it's kind of just this constant cycle of self-affirming bad behavior, if that makes sense.
It's funny because when you get in that habit of negative self-thought, that actually can be a feedback loop that just keeps feeding on itself. I actually noticed that a lot personally when I use a lot more like negative self-talk. It actually like just encouraged me to keep doing it. And I was like, why am I incented to keep talking negatively about myself even though I shouldn't be happy about that? And so I just like quit cold turkey and told people to call me out on it when they notice. And I've been I'm now negative self-talk sober for 3 months, and it's
excellent.
It's feeling great. It's feeling great.
And it's definitely something that I found that you don't master ever at any point in your life, because I can definitely say when I was just out of undergrad and getting into my master's program, I was much better at positive self-talk than I currently am. And that's simply because that muscle has not been exercised consciously in a while. And so it's definitely a skill that you have to constantly be exercising on a regular basis, or else you can lose that ability even if you've habituated it.
Couple points in chat. So Xandra, first of all, thank you for following. Welcome on in. You make the point of like the consequences of the procrastination is what you should focus on rather than the identity of yourself as a procrastinator. So then it gives you something like tangible to actually say, hey, this procrastination is affecting my ability to generate this report I need to do for work. Instead of saying, oh, I'm bad at making reports. I'm a bad person in report making because I procrastinate all the time. So it's taking the you out of the statement there, and that's a very important thing for anything that comes down to like mentality and self-worth and that kind of thing. So I agree with that, definitely. And then Jenny makes a point about like giving yourself grace for, essentially making mistakes, or, having these negative habits. Like no one's perfect, right? And a lot of times when you stress about something, you get stressed about needing to do it. And then you get stressed at thinking that you're stressed. And so it just kind of feeds on itself. At a certain point, it just kind of pays off to just do it. And then you're not stressing about the stress.
And I mean, like I said earlier, procrastination is essentially an issue with managing negative emotion surrounding the possibility of doing a task. So a lot of the time, people who are serial procrastinators, because everyone's procrastinated something at some point, but people who identify as procrastinators tend to negatively associate their self-worth with their ability to do tasks. So they'll say, oh, they might not even consciously be thinking this, but a lot of people think that the mindset that usually comes with procrastination is, I would rather put it off and say that if the task was done poorly, it's because I didn't have enough time rather than my ability to do that task. So if I was given all the time in the world to do this task and it still turned out poorly, that means I suck.
Right.
And a lot of that seems to be the pervading mental state with people who procrastinate regularly.
And that's why you have to take you out of the equation. It's focusing on, here are the things that will be affected by me procrastinating. Those things are bad. I am not bad. But also, I do need to make a change to improve those things. But making that change doesn't make me a better person per se, because I wasn't a worse person for not doing them.
Yeah.
I think I confused myself with that statement, but cool. Carry on.
No, it made sense. It made sense.
Okay.
So when it comes to addressing procrastination, besides self-forgiveness, self-compassion, here are some more actionable steps that I've come across in my research that I found to be very interesting and helpful. So this first one is cultivating curiosity. So I think this is the first step that you take into disassociating yourself from your ability to do something, as opposed to, like Xandra said, the consequences of procrastination. So if you're feeling tempted to procrastinate, bring your attention to the sensations arising in your mind and your body. What feelings are eliciting these temptations to procrastinate? Address those. Identify them. Where do you feel them in your body? Is it a stomach anxiety? Is it a chest anxiety? Is it something that you feel like in your head? What does it remind you of? Do you have any sense memory that you get whenever you feel this way? What happens to the thought of procrastinating as you are observing these feelings? Does it intensify? Does it dissipate? Does it cause other emotions to arise? How are the sensations in your body shifting as you continue your awareness of them? So the first step really is just to identify objectively what's going on in your body, saying like, oh, I'm feeling kind of insecure right now about doing this task and it makes me want to procrastinate. I wonder why that is. And then addressing the source for that insecurity and being like, oh, well, I'm insecure because the last time I did an assignment on this, I didn't get that well of a grade. So what are some things that I could do to help improve my grade? Like asking for help from other people, looking at other resources and things like that. So I thought that was really an interesting kind of sense memory way to approach procrastination. And then, of course, there are other things like breaking up tasks into bite-sized chunks. But there's another way that you can kind of take that bit of advice and help kind of calm your nerves. Basically, at the start of any given task, you can consider the next action as a mere possibility, but focusing merely on what you have to do at that moment. So it's kind of like staying in the moment, being in the present, and taking things one step at a time and not really worrying about what you have to do next, because that will only compound your stress levels.
Rather than focusing on the project as a whole, you're just worried about the next thing that needs to get done.
Yeah, so rather than worrying about, oh, I still have so much left to do, just focus on like, oh, so I need to read through this book to start with my book report. Well, there are 5 chapters, so I'll read chapter 1. Like, that's only focus on chapter 1. And then when you're just like, oh, it's just 1 chapter, it becomes less overwhelming than I have 4 more chapters to go before I even write the report.
And I think when you start doing that first step, you get the momentum going, you get in that mindset, and then you can just keep cruising sometimes. I've had times where I'm like, I've got a project at work, like I do a lot of coding, so I'll be like, okay, I just want to do this one part that does this very basic first step, and I'll just like kind of map out a skeleton of what else I want to do. And then like, well, actually that's a better example. So like, I'll go into a coding thing being like, I just want to lay down basically my comments for my code to figure out which bits are going to do what and how is it organized. And then I find as I'm doing that, I'm basically just writing the code as I go through and build the skeleton. And then like doing that second pass to actually make sure the code is there and it works takes almost no time. So it's kind of like tricking myself into doing what seems like an easy task. Like, oh, I don't have to write the code for this entire thing. I'm just going to kind of write down what I think needs to happen. But by doing that, I'm essentially writing the code and then tricking myself into seemingly something easier, even though really on the surface, the job isn't that difficult. But you just kind of take it one bit at a time.
Yeah, definitely. The actually this particular bit of advice, or actionable step, comes from that sort of self-deception and a layer of kind of like tricking yourself into at least starting the task, because that seems to be
I heard that one.
the noise. That seems to be the most difficult part, is just starting the task. And so once you can get past that, that's all really you need, because you've got the momentum to keep going, because then you realize, oh, it's not that hard to actually do this task. So those are like the two main kind of like mojo jumbo things that I came across, but that are actually really, really helpful. For my people who are more like, give me like concrete things to do, there's this fantastic thing called the 2-minute rule. And this is great for like small tasks that you've been putting off, where it's basically, if you can do a task in 2 minutes, don't delay it. Just do it in the moment. So like, oh, I have to clean the litter box. That takes less than 2 minutes. And so as soon as that comes up, if it takes less than 2 minutes, you have to do it right then and there, and then you'll get it done. I mean, there's also like, you got to be careful that you don't abuse the 2-minute rule, because then you'll use that to procrastinate other tasks. But that's one great way to stop procrastinating small little chores that you've been putting off around the house.
So even stuff like cleaning up laundry, or like doing the dishes, or getting the dishes started, or whatever.
Making your temptations more inconvenient and making your tasks more convenient. So if you know you have something coming up, putting out all of the supplies that you need for those things so that you can plan out when to start that can really be helpful. And then also, if you must, it can be helpful to have someone that you trust to kind of help kick you into gear as you're getting over this sort of cycle of procrastination. But I think it's really important to find someone who you don't feel like will shame you for procrastinating, because there's already that negativity associated with putting things off.
So I feel like both of those things are kind of slippery slopes. So like the first one you mentioned is making those temptations unpleasant. That can be really dangerous if you start punishing yourself for procrastinating, which we kind of touched on earlier.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would worry about that. I know in some cases it is effective, and for some people that works. I would say the same thing about like having someone else hold you accountable. For me, that's never really been a strategy that works, because I end up just like stressing about it and then just like getting into a frozen state where I just like can't deal. So that like that other person accountability thing, like it can work for me, but almost always it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think they also recommend that if you really do struggle quite a bit with procrastination, it's not a bad idea to get some therapy and really talk about why you're having these insecurities about starting a task, even if it's really, really important. And I think that that actionable step, which was to kind of analyze what you're going through, is a lot of what therapy is just being aware of what you're feeling and then addressing it from an objective, not judgmental standpoint.
Yeah, so figuring out why the thoughts that you have in your brain are affecting you in the way that they are.
Yeah, so TLDR, basically, it's all about your brain and your emotions, and then addressing not just like time management things, but also being aware of like the emotional kind of subconscious decision making that comes behind procrastination, which can make us feel pretty helpless. So yeah, I like Jenny says no solution is one size fits all. So I think trying out all of the different methods for avoiding procrastination, but I think all of these methods must come from a very specific mental place as well, because any of these could be abused into actually serving procrastination if you're not careful.
Yeah.
So that is today's topic, and I kind of wanted to kind of ask if you wanted to tell about what the worst or best time you ever procrastinated. What was the outcome? Did it work in your favor? Was it complete disaster? Because I'm sure everyone has a disastrous or miraculous procrastination story.
I've got one really good one that I want to tell.
Okay.
I do want to take an aside quick and go back to Xandra's point about the 2-minute rule. How once you like do that 2-minute task, it quickly turns into like 20 minutes of productivity. And that's kind of the point, right? It's like trick your mind into thinking, oh, this is just one quick thing to do. And then that sets that rhythm in motion where you get into the zone, you get that mentality, that focus, and you just keep going. I mean, that's part of it, right? Anyway, so probably the best example I have of when I really procrastinated something was, I think it was in 10th grade. I was in a creative writing class, and this was like, I think this was the final project of the term. And so it was like, it had to be like a 5-page short story, basically. I had not written a word of it as of like 10 p.m. the night before. And this is like a 10 a.m. class. So it's, 12 hours until it's due, and I need to sleep in that time. Spoiler alert, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, I pulled an all-nighter, hammered a whole bunch of Mountain Dew, and I just listened to like, I don't know, some like really trancy dance music or something, like really loud too, like really loudly. I was just listening to just like a constant beat, kind of like a metronome in the background, basically.
Jeez, that sounds like it would probably put me to sleep if it was metronomic.
No, I find it kind of keeps this tempo, this heartbeat going inside me, and since it doesn't have lyrics, it doesn't distract me. Because like if I'm listening to music that's got lyrics, I start paying attention to the lyrics rather than working on stuff. Yeah, David, to your point, I can no longer do all-nighters. Like I can pull one off if I need to, but I'm very happy never needing to do that again. But I did them all the time in high school, all the time. I mean, I probably averaged one a week. But I mean, this was just one of those. And yeah, I started writing at like 11 p.m. or something. And I went till 3 or 4 a.m. and then I had a finished project. And it was some of the worst writing you might ever see in your life. I need to see if I still have that somewhere. I might. I might be able to dig that up because it hurts. It hurts to read. And like, of course, I got a terrible grade on it. I got like I don't know, a C- or a D. It might have even been an F. Like it was bad. And he basically ripped it apart and he said like, and by the way, this teacher was also my ultimate Frisbee coach. So like we were tight, but,
oh my gosh.
He basically tore it apart saying like, I don't understand what the point of your story is. I was like, I don't know. I just started writing stuff. Like I didn't like lay out a backbone for it or like plan out a plot at a 10,000 foot overview or anything. Like I just started writing stuff on the page, and it came out absolutely terribly. So that's where, especially if I had gotten a start early, and by early I mean on time, like 2 weeks prior, and started like actually fleshing out an outline, figuring out where I wanted the story to go, who my characters were going to be. I feel like that could have been a much more successful piece of writing, but alas, I work better under pressure, right?
Yeah, definitely. We just keep telling ourselves that.
Yeah. Do you have a good one?
I remember in like 6th grade, 6th or like 7th grade. I was really young, and I had put off this sort of science art project that was kind of like a hybrid of both. It was probably elementary school. That sounds like something elementary school would have us do, but it was basically like this diorama of the solar system, and it included like pictures of the planets and then like factoids on the back, and like she had shown us examples of past years, and like they were really pretty and stuff like that. And of course I put it off to the night before, but this is a project that we had been given like 3 weeks in advance. And I remember starting on it and being like, oh, I'll get this done in like 2 or 3 hours because I know the planets, that's easy. But because I was such a perfectionist and I wanted it to look really, really pretty, and I was also like super competitive as a kid, I was just like, mine's gonna be the best one. And so I remember putting it together and working really, really hard on it and being like, I will never procrastinate ever again because this is awful. Like, I feel so tired. I've been working for like 9 hours now.
Dang.
And then I turned it in the next day, and my teacher really, really liked it.
Really?
And the problem with that is that I was like, oh, I can get away with procrastinating. And I remember that's very, very specific memory of being like, procrastinating isn't that bad. What? That could happen.
So,
and then, like, 10 years later, I'm like, oh, that was probably
that's the worst that could happen.
A bad moment in my life.
Yeah.
Upon reflection. But yeah, and I've had a lot of experiences like that where I was just like, I'll never do this again. But because I'm kind of a perfectionist, it still turned out okay. But lots of sleepless nights, lots of like not hanging out with friends because I had an assignment that was due that I should have done long before, and all that stuff. So.
It's funny you bring up a craft project, because those were always the things that I tried to do the night before. And it is brutal because like you start working at 10 or 11 p.m. and then you realize you don't have everything you need. So you need to go like, Mom, I need a ride to the 24-hour Walmart. That's like 20 miles away because that's the only thing that's open at that time of night. And it's because you need like toothpicks or something. You know what I mean? Or like a single styrofoam ball for your planet diorama. Yeah. And it's like, just crafting stuff is not great that late at night.
Oh, science fair projects. The number of really awful science fair projects that I turned in, I don't even want to talk about it. But anyways, on that note, that is today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was really insightful as far as why we procrastinate and how to combat procrastination, because that's definitely something that is pretty prevalent in my waking life. So I've definitely found this to be very helpful for myself, in terms of how I can start really thinking about how my mentality affects how I perform, and not just procrastination, but in all areas of my life. So, we are currently supporting the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum for this charity for this period. They address reproductive health and rights, economic justice, and immigration and racial justice for the AAPI community. So we highly recommend that you take a look at that, and we really appreciate it if you are able to contribute. If you have any questions for us or any comments or letters that you would like to send to us, we have an email at talkytaffy@gmail.com. You can join our Discord and follow us on Twitch as well. I think do we have a Twitter?
Yeah, we do.
We have a Twitter.
I laugh about it because it's just go live notifications, is it?
Yeah, so if you're curious about when we go live, go ahead and follow us on that.
Yeah, if that works better for you than Discord. I'd say Discord is probably our primary channel for anything. And if you guys have stories about your own procrastination, I would love to hear it in the Discord. Yeah,
definitely. And do we know what next time's episode's going to be on?
Certainly. We are going to talk about how we earn our money one fortnight from now. Yeah, so I've got a few ideas for it. Not fully fleshed out yet. I'm procrastinating it a little bit, so we'll see what comes together.
It's okay. You can forgive yourself, Doug.
I've got 2 weeks. I got plenty of time.
And you can also see us on YouTube if you would like to rewatch this episode or see any other previous episodes. Go ahead and check out our channel. And with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. The world is kind of a scary place right now, so just remember to stay positive. Enjoy the time that you have, and if you ever need help and need to be pointed in the direction of people who can help you, we'd be more than happy to help out. And yeah, thanks for joining us, guys.
If you're not listening to us live, we stream on Twitch every other Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Central Time. So asterisk, because sometimes it changes. But yeah. Anyway. Love you all. Go love each other. Okay.
Alrighty. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.